Hello, everybody. It's Wednesday, the 25th of June, 2025. We've done many shows over the years about the current state of men and masculinity, kicked off in some ways with my old friend Richard Reeves, whose book Of Boys and Men began, or at least triggered, the debate about why the modern male is struggling. Women, of course, are involved. There was a New Yorker piece a couple of years ago by Idris Kaloun, which asks, "What's the matter with men?" with a question mark. But my guest today has no question mark on her new book, "What is Wrong with Men? Patriarchy, the Crisis of Masculinity, and How, of course, Michael Douglas Films Explain Everything," by Jessa Crispin. Jessica is joining us from Philadelphia, where she lives. Jessica, why no question mark on the book? Do we know the answer? Are you not really asking the question?
I think it depends. The punctuation depends on the tone in which you want to say the words, right? It could be question mark, could be exclamation mark, could be period if you're feeling very definitive and confident in your answer. So it just depends on the mood. Try to leave it a little open-ended.
And then what's your mood in the book?
My mood is generally in everything exasperated and irritated, but I try to make a few jokes along the way. So
yeah, the New Yorker review said your tone is free associative, irritable, and rat-a-tat. I don't know whether she found you irritable or you were irritable. What are you irritated by?
I think I was irritated primarily by the online discourse about the crisis in masculinity around the time that I started to think about writing the book, and it probably came through a bit. It was the pandemic. Everybody was online having a really good time playing, burn the scapegoat at the stake. And I just thought that for the most part, all of the chit chat about cancel culture, about toxic masculinity was getting us absolutely nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, as you can probably tell, I'm a man last time I checked anyway. And I have to admit that the tone of the conversation is incredibly irritating. The seriousness with which people like Richard Reeves identify today's crisis of masculinity gets on my nerves. And I said, I'm a man. Why are people taking this so seriously? Is it a crisis, Jessa, or is it just something created by rather paranoid, hysterical men like Richard Reeves?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think in general, masculinity is always in crisis. Masculinity is always defined by these very external markers. And so in some sense, it always has to be in crisis because it is always in a state of vulnerability depending on the culture and the political situation that surrounds it. On the other hand, I think that you are seeing just statistically a real decline in the ability for young men and older men to meet basic markers of so-called success or adulthood. The inability to get married, inability to find sexual experience, the inability to finish educational goals, and so on. And so in that sense, there is something going on. I don't know that most of the words and op-ed pieces and blistering posts on social media really get at the actual issue, though.
Do you think a lot of women feel a degree, at least, of a schadenfreude about this, given that women always haven't had the easiest of times historically?
Oh, sure. I mean, of course. Just look at every hashtag. Men are cancer, men are the worst, all men should die. I mean, of course, women are enjoying this to some extent.
Keep on bringing up social media, Jessa. Is that an invention of men or women, do you think?
Well, I think Mark Zuckerberg, as far as I know, is a man. Jack Dorsey is a man. Elon Musk is a man. So I would
a kind of man, I think.
A kind of man, kind of strange, tortured man. But I do think that we have to credit this one to men, ultimately.
So do you think Zuckerberg's been building up his muscles? Musk wants to impregnate as many, or sort of, I don't know, metaphorically at least, impregnate as many women as he possibly can. Are they all aspiring to be your friend Michael Douglas? Is that the cause of all this weirdness that's going on? I mean, can we blame Michael Douglas on Elon Musk?
I don't think that we can. I think it would be strange. I think Elon Musk is his own bizarre figure, right? I don't know in what world created by Michael Douglas that you have a figure who's just trying to impregnate as many women as possible and then all move them into a Texas compound. I mean, that's David Koresh, right? That's not Michael Douglas. I think that's its own strange thing. But as far as the, Zuckerberg and Musk challenging each other to an MMA fight, that I think can be explained by their really intense need to be seen as men, as like capital M men, right? Real men. They know how to fight. They know how to wage war. They know how to destroy physically other people. They know how to wage violence against another body. And so I think that it's a very sort of, they're not getting whatever reinforcement they need from the culture as to be seen as men. They're seen as powerful. They're seen as dangerous. So that's part of masculinity. But they're not getting whatever they need in the sense of manliness. And so Elon Musk just keeps impregnating women until he feels like a real man. Mark Zuckerberg keeps doing jiu-jitsu until he feels like a real man. But I don't know that they're gonna succeed in their project.
Yeah, the traditional narrative, Jessa, is that all these men in their basements, they're all followers of the Tate brothers, all aspiring to have as much sex as they can with women, but can't get jobs. No one takes them seriously. And so they fantasize on social media and hate women. But as you say, I mean, these incredibly successful men, successful in inverted commas, like Zuckerberg, a multi-billionaire, Musk, the richest man in the world. And then there's our friend, well, he's not really my friend, but somebody's friend, Jeff Bezos, who probably as we speak is getting married in Venice, who seems to have spent the last few years bulking up. It's not just a socioeconomic thing, is it? These men want to be bigger and stronger. They want to be Michael Douglas.
Well, they want the structure in order to tell them when they've achieved success, right? Under sort of normal patriarchy, you had, these are the goals, this is what you have to achieve, and this is when you can feel like you did a good enough job. You go to the college that is deemed the important one. You get these jobs. These are the important ones. You get a wife. You have children. You get a house. You get a car. These are the markers.
What about a dog?
Oh, sure. Get the 2.2, children, the vacation in Italy, the retirement at 65. Like, these are very sort of external markers that you've achieved enough. So you've done enough. Those things no longer exist. Nothing is ever enough anymore. And so that's why you see Elon Musk will never stop having children, never stop fathering children. Jeff Bezos will never have enough money to be satisfied. I don't know what's going on with Mark Zuckerberg in his glow up. I don't really understand what's going on there, but it's clear that he has destabilized multiple governments. That's still not enough to make him feel manly, important, whatever, because he's still out there.
You talked about something, and I'm quoting you, normal patriarchy. We've done lots of shows on patriarchies one way or the other. We did one recently with Anna Maleka Tubbs, old friend of mine. She has a new book out called Erased, What American Patriarchy Has Hidden from Us. Your new book also mentions the P word, patriarchy, the crisis of masculinity. What does the word mean? And historically, is the world really being just in very simple terms, a patriarchy?
I would say that the patriarchy existed up until about the 1980s. When you had, at least in the West, patriarchy still exists in other places. But when you have laws that prevent women from voting, owning property, driving a car, having their own lines of credit, being able to enter institutions of education, being able to enter institutions of religion, then that's patriarchy. That is a system that prevents a certain segment of the population from having rights and material resources that are granted to others. That no longer really exists. And it hasn't since the 1970s, when you had like the sort of completion of the very material goals of feminism. We wanted the right to vote. We wanted the ability to leave marriages that were abusive or violent. We wanted to be able to pursue education without obstacles that men did not have. We wanted to be able to pursue employment without the obstacles that men had. So that's all been a success. And so that means that the structure, the political structure, financial structure of the world has changed fundamentally in order to include women within the power structure. So it cannot really be labeled patriarchy anymore, even though the rulers are primarily men at this point.
A lot of people are going to be familiar with your previous manifesto. It was a bestseller, Why I'm Not a Feminist. I'm curious, though, Jessa, why you've made Michael Douglas, so to speak, the star of not your movie, but the star of the book. Why not make a woman? So it's patriarchy, the crisis of masculinity, and how, of course, Michael Douglas films explain everything. I want to get to Michael Douglas, but why not pick a woman and say why, of course, XXS films explain everything? Is there an equivalent, the other side of the coin, to Michael Douglas?
Someone was trying to make the argument to me that Demi Moore was the feminine equivalent to Michael Douglas, which is, I think there's something to it. But why Michael Douglas? Because he performed the spectrum of American masculinity for the span of 15 years, essentially, going through everything from the mass shooter to the president of the United States to, the head of Wall Street. And
Wall Street seems to be, of course, Basic Instinct, the sexual element too.
Sure. So he really ran the gamut of every terrible thing that can happen to an American white male in a Hollywood film. And so I just thought that there was something interesting there. You have to find an angle. You can't put an entire ocean in your book. You got to bring a cup of some sort to kind of hold it.
Yeah, it's interesting you use the words cup and angle to describe men. Michael Douglas, I mean, he looks rather, tell me a little bit about him. I mean, he's not, how big a deal was he? Maybe I missed it. Maybe I was asleep in the 80s and 90s, but was he a huge deal?
He was the biggest deal. His movies were consistently the highest grossing of the year that they came out, and also became sort of the defining icon of certain segments of society. Like Gordon Gekko is Wall Street, right? His sort of portrayal of the financier not only sort of encapsulated what was going on at the time of Wall Street, but really inspired a new generation of men to go and ruin the entire world's economy by emulating him and his greed and his lack of boundaries and his entitled narcissism. So I think that he played a certain special role. And also I think because the 1980s was filled with these sort of other Hollywood stars that weren't about looking at men as they really existed, but really instead creating this sort of inflated fantasy, the Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Sylvester Stallone, like the really pumped up, like heroic. Yeah, like they're with one gun, a man is gonna overthrow an entire army and all this kind of stuff. Like really kind of fantastical ideas about what men look like, what they should do, how they should behave. So I thought Michael Douglas had a more sort of grounded sensibility.
So he's, in a sense, a role model. The standard narrative in dealing with the 80s is the end of one kind of an American dream, Reaganism, neoliberalism, unleashing capitalism. Of course, Douglas's role in Wall Street seems to capture that more than anything else. Is your critique of men, what's wrong with men, could it also be subtitled, what is wrong with capitalism, or male capitalism, or is capitalism itself, or certainly the capitalism of the 1980s, is it quintessentially male?
I think that ultimately capitalism as it currently exists is in this kind of grotesque form. I don't think that Susan Strange wrote this book in the 1980s called Casino Capitalism in order to kind of like mark off the boundaries of how the economy was working now that is different from how it had been in the past. And I do think it's an important distinction, because I think what we have now that we've just referred to as capitalism, sometimes, late stage capitalism, I think it's not necessarily what capitalism is or is capable of. It's just in this kind of grotesque form at the moment. And so it's important to kind of make a distinction.
Although the left and Marxists have been talking about late stage capitalism now for about 150 years. So
yeah, but I'm not a Marxist, so I don't really have to worry about that.
What are you politically then, if you're not a Marxist? Do you have a kind of take on all this? Is that are you anti-capitalist? Is that one way into this, or is it not really? Is your book and your thinking, is it beyond or before politics?
I think politically, my approach is that no matter how you order the world, there's always going to be somebody who the boot of that world is going to be on their neck. And it is, I think, the job of the writer or the critic or the, provocateur, however you want to say it, to attend to their needs. I do not really have a kind of fantasy version in my head of the best way to order the world. I do not have a fantasy of glorious revolution and how if we just murder 10% of the world, we will somehow attain nirvana. I just think that it's interesting to look at how the world as it currently exists afflicts certain people. And I think right now it afflicts, for the most part, poorer men.
So if you're not a political thinker, you're more of a cultural thinker. The title of your Substack is The Culture We Deserve.
Yeah.
Is that true? Where does culture begin and end? If we get the culture we deserve, who exactly are we, and who's providing the culture? I mean, and maybe to make it a little bit more concrete, who served up Michael Douglas to us? Was it Hollywood? Was it producers? Was it Wall Street? I don't know how we get our culture that we deserve.
Well, who created Michael Douglas? I mean, in some sense, it was Kirk Douglas, his father. And Kirk Douglas had a much sort of larger range of expression in his Hollywood films, right? Like Michael Douglas, he played a banker, he played the president, he played, he kept playing detective, banker, politician over and over again. It's a very sort of like small segment of the world. And Kirk Douglas played Van Gogh, he played Spartacus, he played the villain and the hero and the cowboy and all these sort of like enormous range of archetypes of masculinity. And I think the fact that his son played such a smaller version of masculinity says something about the sort of shrinking role of men in society, but also the sort of shrinking land that was available, the shrinking range of expression and emotion and things to do in the world, ways to contribute to the world that men were sort of facing at the time. But I think that, 1980s Hollywood is primarily being run by men. I think that a lot of this was fantasies and fears and anxieties that they had about a changing world that they wanted expressed in film, consciously or unconsciously.
Yeah, I mean, is that how the movies work? I recently went to my local movie theater in San Francisco, the Alamo, which was showing one of the great masterpieces of the 70s, Dog Day Afternoon, featuring Al Pacino. Gene Hackman recently died, and we also saw The French Connection. How were men represented differently by actors like Hackman and Pacino in the 70s? I mean, what happened? Was it, again, I keep on asking the same question. I know it's hard to answer. But was it a cultural or a political shift between the 70s and the 80s?
Well, it was both, right? I mean, you had this sort of end of this sort of, hippie rebellion. You had the end of rebellion as aspirational, I guess, through the 60s and the 70s. And then you had the beginning of this kind of suburban conformity, which was happening within this entire generation. The boomer generation went from
but you could have
flower children to Wall Street.
Right, but Jess, if we were having this conversation in the 40s, I mean, the internet didn't exist, but if we were talking to one another, or in the 50s, you might say, well, it's all the conformity of the man in the brown suit and blah, 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 and Eisenhower's America. I mean, that had happened before, hadn't it?
Yeah, I mean, but it swings between extremes. It swings between disorder to overcorrecting into conformity or into a restrictive sense of order. People go through the extremes of World War II. They come home, they want serious stability. The 60s and the 70s were a time of terrorism, political assassination. I mean, of course, everybody sort of wanted to retreat into conformity in the 1980s, into the sort of tidy little suburban household. But that's how the cycle of things go.
Thinking about Pacino in Dog Day Afternoon, or even Hackman in The French Connection as Jimmy Popeye Doyle, his great role, these were men who were vulnerable. And perhaps the difference between them and your Michael Douglas, I mean, he's not really your Michael Douglas, but the Michael
Douglas.
He's
mine in my heart. Yeah,
you've taken him now. No one will ever think about Michael Douglas without thinking about Jessa. Is a degree of invulnerability, but as you note, it's a kind of cartoonish. Was there already a crisis with Douglas? I mean, and it was kind of papered over until today.
Well, I think, in the 1980s, one thing that really changed society that I think gets overlooked is the beginning of the no-fault divorce, which was really started in the mid to late 70s, but state by state, so it was spreading through the United
Ronald
States.
Reagan was the pioneer of that, ironically enough.
And so what you had was divorce rates going through the roof. And at least 2/3 of them consistently were being instigated by women. And so I think in response to that, there was this sort of fantasy that was being created at the time of the male midlife crisis, where a kind of you can't fire me, I quit fantasy was being generated, where it's not that women are kicking their husbands out of their house. It is that I'm riding off into the sunset on my motorcycle with a 21-year-old secretary and living my best life. They weren't. They were being rejected. They were being abandoned. They were being kicked out. They were being rejected. And the thing is that, the consequences for a woman going through a divorce were quite serious at the time. Their income levels dropped. You know, they were often saddled with the majority, if not the totality, of childcare responsibilities. Often they were forced to go back to work if they had taken time off, and they found their income was severely cut and their ambitions were thwarted. And yet, despite all of that, knowing all of that, women still did not want to live with their husbands anymore. And so I think that there was this really kind of bizarre fantasy that began in the 1980s of men, I'm rejecting these women. I'm rejecting my family. I don't want these responsibilities. I'm too cool for this. I can't be bothered. And it was really just about ego protection. And you see, like, that disconnect just continues to grow and grow until now we have these male influencers. It's like, you can't hold a woman's hand. That's gay. You know, you can't have sex with women. That's gay. The most bizarre logic that comes out of Andrew Tate's mouth about how, you know, you cannot possibly have a romantic relationship with a woman because that reveals some sort of shameful hidden femininity or homosexuality within you. I mean, that's just a kind of distorted thinking that goes beyond, you know, Freud is, you know, doing coke in his grave thinking about it right now.
Well, I can't imagine Freud doing coke in his grave, but
Freud did a lot of coke. I don't know.
Not in his grave, though. Well, anyway,
I'm sure.
I mean, I hope the Tates have. I mean, if Freud is going to have coke in his grave, it's probably through the Tate brothers, as you know. Is there a difference, though, between the Tate brothers and James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause, or Brando, or the other figures of the transition between the 50s and 60s? What's the fundamental difference? Were they not angry?
Well, they cried, right? I mean, James Dean, Brando, all of these sort of men that were the pinnacles of masculinity at the time, they cried on screen. They fell in love on screen. Andrew Tate does not fall in love. You know, he sexually violates. He's charged with sex trafficking. The things that he argues that the way that men should treat women is horrific. And it has nothing to do with pleasure. It's about dominance. And it's not about anything other than trying to save male ego from the realization that they are falling behind. They are not in control. They are not in a dominant position. If anything, they are failing rapidly and terribly.
If any man is still managing to watch this, you are failing. What is it? Rapidly, and what was the other word?
I don't remember.
What about the previous versions of men in Hollywood? I mean, Jimmy Stewart in Vertigo comes to mind, a man who was made to look very foolish by women. There have been many Hollywood representations of not the vulnerability of men, but the way in which they are used and abused by women. Is this another familiar trope of Hollywood?
Is that what you think Vertigo was about? Was James Stewart being fooled by women? I mean, he sadistically tries to control her. You know, like he's a very sort of manipulative and deranged figure in Vertigo. He's not being fooled by a woman. But he wasn't fooled by a woman. He was fooled by a man who was telling that woman what to do. Like, that's a very sort of warped way of looking at Vertigo.
Well, it's a warped film, so it's hard to look at Vertigo without getting drawn into its warped nature. But he did fall into the image. I mean, he was rather naive in believing in a woman who didn't really exist, and then trying to dress up another woman to look like her. So
yeah,
did that reflect?
I don't think that means that he's being fooled by a woman. I think that he's being fooled by himself. He's being manipulated by a man who's doing this in order to kill his wife, right? Like, it's not. Yeah, I mean, if anything, it's just a sign that men will blame women for anything.
Well, and Hitchcock, of course, got away with Vertigo, and it's still voted one of the great films of all time. Again, I mean, the question I'm asking is, has Hollywood really changed from Vertigo and Hitchcock and Vertigo and Stewart to Douglas to, I mean, the Tate brothers aren't really Hollywood characters, although maybe Hollywood is in decline now and the internet is Hollywood.
Well, I think that, right now what you have is a kind of financial takeover of Hollywood, venture capitalist takeover of Hollywood, which means that what gets made is what's going to be financially successful, as in a guarantee. So it's all sequels and remakes and intellectual property done to death. And I think that sort of real filmmaking as storytelling is taking a hit, even in sort of independent sectors, even in Europe, even in these places that we thought would have a sort of protected tradition. I think that right now it's seen only as a money generator with very little else going on, which is not to say that I don't think some people can't do interesting things. I think, I talk about Verhoeven and Fincher in this book as making very interesting films in this time. But I think it's extremely hard, and maybe the hardest it's ever been, to make something with a purpose other than to make some guy on Wall Street even richer than he already is.
So in a way, the decline of Hollywood isn't necessarily a bad thing in terms of, I don't know if the thesis of your book, but in terms of the patriarchy and the crisis of masculinity.
I think the decline of Hollywood is a bad thing because I really enjoy movies. I really like Michael Douglas movies. I wish that movies like that were of that quality were made today. I didn't write this book because I hate Michael Douglas or I hate Michael Douglas movies. I've seen Basic Instinct like 15 times, for God's sake.
So what should we do about all this? We did a show with another writer on the crisis of masculinity, Niobe Way. She's a professor at NYU, so more of an academic. She has a new book. It was out last year, Rebels with a Cause, Reimagining Boys, Ourselves, and Our Culture. She seems to argue that boys need to understand their, shall we say, their feminine side or their softer side. I was wondering, in your kind of critique of the Tate brothers, whether you might, in a way, agree. I mean, what's to be done here?
Well, I think this ultimately comes down to the way that people make money and contribute to society, and the roles that they're supposed to play in the culture create this monstrous form of masculinity. How do you get rich? How do you make any amount of money in today's society? You do it through gambling, through speculation, through the people that make the most money in American finance are the people who work primarily through speculation, by making bets, not by making something, not by contributing something material to the world, but just by betting on the things that other people make. And I think it reveals a real kind of sickness to our culture, that you are not incentivized to make a contribution. You are incentivized to place wild bets on other people's contributions. And I think that ultimately has to change. I think ultimately a sense of political solidarity and a sense that we are not each other's competitors, we are each other's collaborators. And I mean that between the genders, I mean that between the political divide, and in every other sense of the word. I think that is the way forward, and anything else, just telling boys to feel free to cry, I don't think that ultimately does anything, when the only way that they can, when the entire, manosphere, when everything that they see online is like, get into crypto, bet on sports, punch a woman in the face to make her like you. All this kind of real influence and pressure you're not going to be able to fight against that just by learning how to cry.
Yeah, I think you're more of a political thinker than you would acknowledge. I'm wondering whether People like Gavin Newsom, there was a Times piece recently suggesting that he is trying to understand bro culture, so to speak, and become a bro.
Yeah.
I mean, we haven't mentioned Trump, and I don't want to turn this into another Trump conversation, but in political terms, should we be wary of wannabe bros like Gavin Newsom?
Yeah, I mean, the whole Democrat thing of like, we need to find a leftist Joe Rogan. We need to spend $20 million on a study for how men communicate with one another. This is all incredibly silly. Like, you need to figure out how to get young boys back engaged in school and meeting their educational goals. And that's not through standardized testing. That's not through pumping everybody with psychopharmaceuticals. This is about material things. This is about making sure people have steady employment, making sure people have steady income, making sure that people have healthcare and community, and are not just in their basements on video games listening to podcasts all of the time. Actual real engagement with the world.
Yeah, but I take your point, Jessa, but if you had that, why would people still come out of their basements and stop listening to podcasts like this? What are they going to do?
Oh God, anything. Go plant a tree, go to church, find God, get drunk, like finger a girl at the bar after she gives you consent, like have a good time, live a life that is like engaged with the world around you rather than sort of yelling at a fantasy version of it online. I think we have a real weird culture right now, and it's not leading really anywhere good.
Finally then, and why are girls surviving this? Why are girls not in this crisis of there's people don't write about toxic femininity, and we haven't come across the female version of the Tate. There are no Tate sisters. Why are girls? And I use this word carefully because I know it's a bit of a dumb word, but succeeding and men not. So, well, someone I'm sure has written a book or will write a book called "What is Right with Women?" Why are women right and men wrong?
I don't think it's women are right, men are wrong. But first, I would say we do have Tate sisters, and it's called the Kardashian family. And I think that they have put enough environmental toxins into the world on the same level. Maybe they can't be brought up on sex trafficking charges, but I think they have a similarly terrible effect on the culture. But secondly, how do women succeed where men are falling behind? Because in second wave feminism, there was a real sense that it's not enough to remove obstacles. You have to build support systems for women. It's not enough to say, okay, we have no fault divorce now, so now you can leave your husband. That's not going to do anything for the woman whose husband has a gun that he threatens her with every time she talks about leaving. She needs a domestic violence shelter. She needs family court assistance. She needs et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so women and feminists built parallel support systems in order to help women get into the institutions, get into universities, get out of terrible marriages, get into community, get into friendships and mentorships, and into the career ambitions that they had. And that's why when these institutions started to fall apart and only sort of cater to the ultra wealthy, women had more support systems to assist them than men did. Because men feel like they should be the priority of these institutions. They should be the center of attention and care. And so they do not want to build parallel support systems because they are supposed to be the primary figure in society. The world is supposed to adapt to men. Men are not supposed to adapt to the world. And so that's why.
Yeah, maybe it's the Michael Douglas trap. Maybe we'll call this that show. Jessa Crispin, author of What is Wrong with Men, Patriarchy, The Crisis of Masculinity, and how, of course, Michael Douglas films explain everything. Wonderfully spiky conversation, Jessa, and we disagree on Vertigo. You'll have to come back on the show. We'll do a whole show on Vertigo. And
Happy to.
We will fight it out in Tate Brothers without the violence of the Tate Brothers. Congratulations on the new book, Jessa. Real honor and fun to have you on the show. Thank you so much.